Well, Hazenographers, hello again and welcome to another episode. Today I'm going to show you what I think is one of the nicest mirrorless cameras you can buy. It's really small, it's really quiet, it's a groovy, wonderful little thing. It shoots any lens, pretty much, just like all mirrorless cameras, and I think it's one of the most competent, best value mirrorless cameras there is. It's not the cheapest. It costs around about £300 for a body in good condition and around about £350 to £400 for a body with a lens. I think it's a 16 to 50 kit lens that comes with these. It's the Sony A6000. Anyway, let me tell you what it is. The Sony A6000, a very, very beautiful little machine, and I've been shooting this lately and it's just such a wonderful little camera. It's very familiar to me actually because I shoot a Sony A7 quite a lot. It's the camera I test all the vintage lenses with, and this camera is very, very similar in layout. The top deck is similar, the back is similar, the controls are similar. It doesn't quite have the number of dials and wheels and buttons that the A7 has. We'll come to that. I'll tell you exactly how it differs. It doesn't have the hump on the top that the A7 has. It has the viewfinder over here on the left. It has an APS-C sensor rather than the Sony's full frame. So there is a crop factor of about 1/3. So if you use a lens that was designed for 35mm film or full frame, supposing you put a full frame 50mm on here, it will actually behave as though it was a 75mm. The effective focal length is increased. Note that use, please, of the word effective. This is only effective. It's not a magical thing. I know it's kind of caused a lot of controversy, I think, and some people can't understand how it happens, but it does happen, I assure you. It's not magic, it's just optics. So you do get a very slight loss of character in the lens. If you imagine it, if this is your frame on a full frame, and so it's going to be slightly compressed at the sides and the top, so you're going to get a more central portion of that image, so you lose the edge, so you lose the full character of the lens. Although personally, actually, I found that lenses behaved really nicely on this, and I never, while I was using it, ever remember thinking, oh gosh, I really wish this was full frame because I'm losing the character of the lens. So I don't think it's a terrible thing, really. Image quality is absolutely wonderful. Very, very nice images come out of this camera, and I couldn't see personally any discernible difference between the images that come out of this camera, the A6000, and the Sony A7 that I'm shooting this on right now. There may be technically a difference. I guess if you look for it, if you really zoom in, you'll see a difference. And if you do all sorts of very technical sort of tests on the images, you will see a difference. But for all practical purposes in day-to-day life, there is no real loss of quality. So I really don't think that's a problem. So the question then arises, do you need an A7? Do you need full frame rather than this little beauty? And you know what, I think for the most part the answer would be no. I personally need an A7 because I shoot a lot of vintage lenses for the channel, and I like to give you the full character of those lenses. I think it's important to show the full character of those lenses as they are. So I don't use crop sensor cameras to shoot the images that I show on the channel. So I need an A7. I'm not sure that anyone else does. This makes beautiful, beautiful images. Of course, if you really want full frame, yeah, go and get one. But if you're not that bothered, this really comes up with the goods and really does the business. So let's have a closer look at this little camera. I'll just take the filter off the lens because you can't really see a lot with filters going on. I've got a Jupiter 8 on here, 1955 Jupiter 8 with the focusing tab, and it looks fantastic on this camera. Let's have a closer look. So there's our little A6000. This is a very beautifully made little camera. Let me turn it around and show it to you. I think this Jupiter 8 fits perfectly on here. It's perfectly proportioned. Rangefinder lenses really work well on this camera, and because of the crop factor they'll go a little bit closer effectively than they would on a full frame camera. There is our back panel, and there's the screen. It's a flippy up and a flippy down, but sadly it's not a flippy round screen, which personally I rather like. None of the Sony cameras seem to go for that. All of this switch gear is very similar to the A7. Record button there for the movies, same as the A7, and you'll see that the top deck too is actually very similar. So there are many similarities and design cues from the A7. If you've used any of the Nex cameras, any of the Alpha cameras, you're going to be familiar with this one. And it's a really small camera as well, and I do appreciate small size in a camera. I think it's wonderful. There's nothing worse than having to carry around massive bits of kit and gear with you, and this is really small. And in fact, let's compare it. I've got here one of my treasured little Barnack Leicas. This is a 3A. So if we compare for height, well, the 6000's a little taller. Let's show you on here. There we are. You can see the 6000 is a little taller than the Leica. In terms of width, let's put them together. Actually there, you can see that the Leica is wider than the Sony. It's also wider on the bottom. Oops, that's the battery end. It's not wider there. So it's got a very thin bottom plate, the A6000, whereas the Leica is actually bigger. So for a camera to be smaller than a Barnack Leica, it's not quite smaller, it's a bit taller. The Barnack Leica won't stand up. I do find it annoying when cameras don't stand up. Alright, you sit there. So for any camera to be smaller than a Barnack Leica, which this is in this dimension, is a real outstanding achievement. This is a real small camera, and if you have a small lens on it, maybe a wide, one of the wides that are coming out of China perhaps, a smaller lens or a lens that will collapse, such as I think the Fed 10 will. The Fed 10 collapses on the Sony A7. I don't know if it collapses on here, but certainly this is a camera that could conceivably, with a small lens, go into a pocket. So the screen is 16:9 on here. Focus please. Thank you. The screen is 16:9 on here, whereas on the A7 it's a 3:2 screen, or possibly a 4:3 screen, but it's much taller in its aspect. The viewfinder is on the right hand side here, and it's really nice. You could be just looking at almost a natural scene seen through your eyes. It's that good. It's almost as good as an optical viewfinder. So it's a really nice one. This camera gives fantastic use of space. It's really bundled in nice and small. But that viewfinder means that it's a handed camera. This is a right-handed camera. I happen to be right-handed, so that's fine for me, and it works nicely like that. But if you're left-handed and you want to use your left hand, well, you have to use your right hand to actually control the camera, but putting this to your left eye, not quite so easy. Perhaps it's not a big thing, I don't know, but it is something maybe to bear in mind. It is a bit less controllable than the A7, and the main respect where that shows up is that on the A7, right on the top here, on the right hand side, just by your right thumb where you need it, is an exposure compensation dial. Well, this one doesn't have that. It's fairly easily accessible actually, it's just a button on the back. And then it comes up electronically in the menu, so it's pretty accessible and it's pretty near to hand. But I do like that exposure compensation dial. If you're out shooting and you need to make a small adjustment in exposure without messing about too much, it's very, very handy to have that there. And I did miss that when I was shooting this camera. It's got a lovely little pop-up flash as well, which the A7 doesn't have. Where's my glasses? And pop. There it goes on one of those amazing little mechanisms that's just so beautifully engineered. And it goes down flat, nice and flush on the top deck here. Top deck is really simple on this camera. It's not cluttered and it's not confusing, and I do appreciate that. This is a very, very quiet shutter sound on this camera, unlike the A7, which is a real loud clank when it goes. Both cameras have an electronic first curtain shutter, and that's optional. You can use that, or you can use a mechanical first curtain shutter. And what that means is, on these cameras, these mirrorless cameras, I'll just take this lens off, the sensor is permanently exposed. There's nothing in front of it. It's just directly open to the lens. You can see that there. So when you take a shot, it has to begin dark. And so something has to come in front of that sensor when you actually press the shutter button, open, and then shut again. Now you can do that two ways. You can do it electronically, which is where you switch off the sensor, so it's a sort of simulated darkness. Then switch it on for a very short time, and then bring in the second curtain of the shutter to make the exposure. Mechanically, what you have to do is first close the shutter, open it and close it again. So the mechanical version is, the mechanical option rather, which you can select, is noisier. I'll demonstrate the shutter sound to you actually. So this is what it sounds like with first curtain shutter off. On rather, sorry, electronic first curtain shutter on. And that's so quiet. That's a real soft click. Let's compare it to the Leica. So here we go. Let's have a double shutter firing. I think I'll need some more hands to do that. So here we are. Double shutter firing. Here we go. Leica first. And then Sony. And they're actually not that different. So this is a really, really quiet camera. Now I'll show it you with the electronic first curtain shutter off, if I can find it. It may take me a week or so to find it going through the menus, so perhaps we'll skip ahead here a little bit. Okay, so here then is the shutter sound with the mechanical first curtain shutter enabled. Here we go. And you can see that it's a little noisier, but it's actually still really quiet. And this is a very, very quiet camera in operation. It's ideal for the street. It's very discreet. Put a little rangefinder lens on it. Nobody will get threatened by this camera. It's a tiny little friendly, non-intimidating little machine. Far better than waving a great big SLR in somebody's face or a bigger mirrorless. And in fact, one reason why these Leicas in their day were used for street photography is because they were really, really quiet. And this Sony also has that advantage. Now the battery life on here is reasonable. It's not the best battery life I've encountered, but it is better than the A7. The A7 eats batteries, and they actually use the same battery. The A7 has a great big full frame sensor to power, so it takes a lot more power and it uses the battery quicker. This battery, well, I don't know, I went out for a modest day's shooting. It wasn't sort of full-on shooting all the time. But at the end of that day's shooting, where I did use the camera a lot, when I got back I had 20% battery left, so that's pretty good. I don't think the A7 would have lasted that time and kept its charge that well. The video from this camera is pretty nice. It does look lovely actually when you shoot it straight out of camera. It looks lovely. It uses the APS-C HD codec. I think it's called APS-C HD, and it's a bit of an old-fashioned codec right now. It was quite the thing when it came out, but there are better codecs that have succeeded it. And while the video is nice, it won't take a grade, which means if you put it in edit software and you try to adjust color balance or contrast or put a preset look on it, it doesn't like it. The file isn't sort of deep enough to take so many alterations. It will take a bit of grading, but not very much. So this is not the camera to use if you want to shoot a movie, for example, or a short. But it's great for, you know, day-to-day videos of the family, videos of, you know, holidays or trips out, if we ever are allowed to go on trips out again. And it's beautiful, beautiful videos straight out of camera for that kind of use. It'd be good for YouTube videos as well. The video that you're watching now actually is from exactly the same codec on the Sony A7. So it is nice, it looks nice, but it doesn't take a grade too well. This camera works great with vintage lenses, and as I say, I think the rangefinder lenses are, certainly in terms of proportion, the best ones for this camera. And with a rangefinder lens, it just looks right. The proportions are right, the size is about right, everything's right about it. If you put bigger lenses on it, or SLR lenses that need a longer extension tube, a longer adapter tube, yeah, then you end up with a fairly big old lens and a pretty small camera. But then those lenses are big, whatever mirrorless camera you put them on, there's no way around that. It has focus peaking just the same as the A7 does, but it's not quite so prominent on the 6000 as it is on the A7. On the A7 you can see the peaking very, very clearly and very intensely. In fact, sometimes it gets in the way of the image. It's less intense on this one, but it's still more than enough to get good focus, good sharp focus with, so that's fine. Now I thought it might be interesting to compare this APS-C camera with another APS-C camera I looked at recently, and that's this lovely little XT10 from Fujifilm, and there they both are. You can see that they're of similar size width-wise. They're the XT10, the Fuji, is a little taller and it's got this hump on top to accommodate the screen for the viewfinder. The whole design philosophy with these cameras is different. The XT10 is really designed as a film camera simulation, a digital camera that simulates as far as it can the experience of a film camera, and in fact it's quite similar to a film camera in its layout on top there. If you're interested in this camera, there is a video I did of it very recently, about 2 or 3 videos back, but you can see there that in fact this is quite reminiscent of a film camera. We've got a shutter speed dial, an exposure compensation dial, something else over here, what's this? A mode dial, a shooting mode dial. Of course you wouldn't find that on a film camera, only the very last ones, latest ones. But yeah, that's the whole philosophy behind this camera. But at heart, it's an APS-C digital camera. There are no film simulations in the Sony, but there are various picture styles instead. What have we got here? So we've got standard, vivid, which is what I shoot in all the time on the A7. I very rarely change from that. It's a nice setting. Neutral, clear, deep, light, portrait, landscape, sunset, which is a very warm kind of look, night scene for shooting at night maybe, autumn leaves, a nice sort of autumn look, black and white, it does nice black and whites, sepia, and then we're back to standard. So we've got all those what Sony call creative styles. As I say, I only ever use the vivid setting. And when I'm using this camera, or the A7, or any of the Sony cameras, I never think to myself, oh gosh, I wish I had some film simulations on here. I find that the vivid setting is just really, really nice, and I rarely use anything else. So honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect when I bought this camera. I wasn't sure how it would compare to the images that I was used to from the A7. But they're beautiful, and it's a lovely, lovely little camera. It's small, it's quiet, it's discreet, it's beautifully made and designed. It shoots all the vintage lenses and loads of modern ones too, Sony ones, third-party ones. There are a lot of lenses available for this camera now, as well as manual focus lenses, all the fantastic and interesting manual focus lenses coming out of China. As regards cost, it's around about, I think I did mention this at the top, but I'll remind you again, it's around about £300 for a good body, and round about 350 to 400 for a body with a lens. Not the cheapest mirrorless camera, but certainly one of the most desirable. It's absolutely beautiful. So that is it from me for now. Please don't forget to do all those YouTubey type things. What are they? Liking, subscribing, and ringing the bell. That helps the channel if you can do that. And if you like the content on this channel and you want to support it, you can do that too from just $1 at patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.